My name is Prince Khalid bin Fazel. I am 28 years old, the fourth son of one of the most powerful princes in the kingdom, grandson of a king, great-grandson of the man who forged this nation from sand and tribal blood. From the moment I took my first breath in a private wing of a hospital where entire floors were cleared for my mother's labor, I was told I was chosen, blessed, destined for a life that others could only dream about in their most desperate prayers. My wealth, I cannot even calculate it myself. Not really. When you grow up with numbers so large they become abstract. When your monthly allowance could feed a village for years. When you forget which countries hold your properties, which banks manage which accounts. Wealth stops being about money and becomes simply the air you breathe. I have never, not once in my entire life, been told no because something costs too much. That concept, financial limitation, it exists for other people. Not for princes, not for the sons of the House of Saud. I remember being 7 years old, standing in the marble courtyard of our family compound, watching a convoy of 12 black SUVs pull up just to take me to school. Armed guards, drivers in perfect uniforms. Routes planned days in advance. My classmates were other princes, other sons of ministers and billionaires. We sat in air-conditioned rooms where the temperature never varied by even a single degree, where every surface gleamed, where even the pencils we used were imported from Europe, not because Saudi pencils were insufficient, but because we could. By the time I was 16, I owned my first car, a custom Mercedes that cost more than most people's houses. Matte black with gold trim, my initials stitched into leather seats so soft you could sleep on them. I never drove it myself. That would have been beneath my station. A driver took me wherever I wanted, which was mostly just circles around the city, showing off to friends whose cars were almost as expensive. We would race sometimes, late at night, on empty highways, security vehicles trailing behind us like anxious parents. Nothing ever happened to us. No police, no tickets, no consequences. The rules that governed everyone else simply did not apply to us. When I turned 18, my father gave me a villa. Not a room, not an apartment, an entire villa. 3 stories, 8 bedrooms, a pool that glowed blue at night like a rectangle of captured sky. Staff quarters in the back where 5 people lived, just to make sure I never had to wash a dish, fold a cloth, or pick up anything I dropped. I lived there alone most of the time. A palace for a boy, rooms I never entered, spaces that echoed with emptiness. I traveled constantly, because I could, because boredom was the only enemy wealth could not defeat. Private jets waited at the airport, not commercial terminals where normal people shuffled through security, but private hangars where you drove your car right up to the stairs, walked up, and 15 minutes later you were in the air, London for the weekend. Paris for dinner, Dubai, New York, Los Angeles. Cities blurred together. Hotel suites that all looked the same. Penthouse views of skylines I never really looked at. I was not traveling to see the world. I was running from the silence in my own head. Everyone bowed. That is not metaphor, not exaggeration. When I walked into a room, men, twice my age, men with their own fortunes and titles, would lower their eyes, stand if they had been sitting, adjust their posture to show deference. Not because I had earned it, not because I was wise or kind or particularly talented, but because of my name, because of the blood in my veins. Because to disrespect me was to disrespect the family, and to disrespect the family was to invite consequences no one wanted to imagine. I watched this happen thousands of times, saw grown men calculate their words before speaking to me, saw women drop their gazes when I passed, saw waiters in expensive restaurants tremble slightly when they served my table. At first, when I was young, it felt like power, like proof that I was special. But somewhere in my late teens, it started to feel different. Hollow, like everyone was bowing to a costume I wore, not to the person underneath. The prayers came 5 times a day. Of course they did. We were a royal family built on religion and oil, the 2 pillars that held everything up. From childhood, I was taught the motions, the Arabic phrases, the rituals that marked a devout Muslim. I woke before dawn for Fajr, washed in the prescribed way, knelt on expensive prayer rugs woven by craftsmen who spent months on each one, faced Mecca, but even as my lips moved, even as my forehead touched the floor in prostration, something inside me remained untouched. The words were memorized, automatic. I could recite them perfectly while my mind wandered to other things. to the car I wanted to buy, to the trip I was planning, to the girl I had seen in a photograph. The prayers were routine, like brushing my teeth, a thing you did because it was expected, because not doing it would raise questions, draw attention. I went to the mosque, of course, especially on Fridays, when being seen mattered. I sat among other young princes, other sons of privilege, in the sections reserved for us, the best spots, closest to the imam, farthest from the common crowd that pressed in at the back. We wore our finest thobes, our most expensive watches just visible under our sleeves. We looked pious. We looked devoted. And inside, at least for me, there was nothing but noise. I tried to feel something. Truly I did. There were moments, especially in the Grand Mosque, when the call to prayer echoed off those ancient stones, when thousands of voices rose together in recitation, when I would close my eyes and search for something, anything, a presence, a response, proof that God was not just a set of rules and rituals, but an actual, living, caring force. I found silence. Not the peaceful silence of meditation, but the empty silence of a phone that never rings, a door no one answers. I would pray, ask for guidance, for purpose, for some explanation of why I felt so hollow despite having everything. And the ceiling of my room would stare back at me, indifferent. The God I had been taught about felt distant, unreachable, or perhaps simply disinterested in a spoiled prince who had never suffered a day in his life. The emptiness grew. It was not sadness, not exactly, it was worse. It was a numbness, a sense that I was watching my own life from the outside, going through the motions of being a prince, checking off the boxes of what was expected, but never actually living. I had everything, and it meant nothing. I was surrounded by people and utterly alone. I believed in God in theory, but had never once felt his presence, never once heard his voice, never once experienced anything that could not be explained by ritual and repetition. My friends, the other princes, seemed content, or at least they pretended to be. We would sit in private lounges, smoking shisha, laughing at jokes that were not that funny, talking about sports, cars, business deals our fathers were involved in. Sometimes we talked about women in ways that made me uncomfortable, even as I laughed along, pretending I was one of them. It was all so shallow, so predictable, so endlessly empty. At night, when I lay in my enormous bed in my empty villa, staring at the ceiling, I would feel something like panic rising in my chest. Is this it? I would think. Is this all there is? 80 more years of this, of waking up to servants, of prayers that echo in my skull but never reach my heart, of money that buys everything except the one thing I actually need, meaning, purpose, truth. I started searching. It began innocently enough, or as innocently as anything can begin when you live under a system that monitors, that watches, that punishes deviation with a severity most of the world cannot imagine. I was in my villa one night, alone, unable to sleep, scrolling through my phone, out of habit, more than interest. The internet in Saudi Arabia is filtered, controlled, certain sites blocked, certain words flagged. But when you have money, when you have access, there are always ways around the walls. I had VPNs installed, tools that masked my location, made it look like I was browsing from London or New York instead of Riyadh. I used them mostly for entertainment, for watching shows that were banned, for accessing social media without restrictions. Trivial things. But that night, for reasons I still do not fully understand, I typed something different into the search bar. Why do I feel empty? Such a simple question. Such a desperate human question. The results flooded in. Articles, forums, videos, people all over the world asking the same thing. But as I scrolled, one phrase kept appearing over and over in different forms. Jesus fills the void. At first I scrolled past it, instinctively. Reflexively, Jesus was a prophet. Yes, we acknowledged him in Islam, but he was not, could not be what these people were claiming. God in flesh, Savior, the only way to the Father. These were Christian lies, blasphemies, things I had been taught to reject without examination. But the emptiness in my chest pressed harder, and somewhere, in the privacy of my room, with no one watching but God, if he was even there, I clicked. I read testimonies. Dozens of them, people from every background, every country, Muslims, Hindus, atheists, all of them describing the same thing. A moment when they encountered Jesus, not as a historical figure, not as a prophet, but as a living, present, undeniable reality. They spoke of peace that made no sense, of joy that defied their circumstances, of a love so overwhelming it shattered every defense they had built. I told myself it was lies, emotion, psychology, anything but truth. But I kept reading. Hours passed. The Kol Tefajah echoed from a nearby mosque, and I was still there. Phone glowing in the dark. Heart pounding, because something in those words, in those stories, resonated with a frequency I had never heard before. They were talking about a God who was not distant, not silent, not satisfied with rituals, but who pursued, who intervened, who loved with a specificity that was almost terrifying. And then I saw it. A link, simple, unadorned. Read the Bible online. My hand hesitated over the screen. In Saudi Arabia, owning a Bible is illegal. Bringing one into the country can get you arrested, imprisoned, deported if you are a foreigner, worse if you are a citizen. Converting from Islam is apostasy, punishable by death under Sharia law, even for especially a prince, because our family's legitimacy rests on religious authority. A prince who abandons Islam does not just betray his faith, he threatens the entire structure. I knew all of this, and yet my thumb moved almost by itself, and the page loaded, white background, black text, the Gospel of John. I stared at it for a long time, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was forbidden. This was dangerous. This was the line you do not cross. But the emptiness was louder than the fear. And so, in the darkness of my villa, in the heart of one of the most restrictive kingdoms on earth, I began to read. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and everything began to change. Reading on a screen was one thing, but I needed to hold it, to feel the weight of it in my hands. I cannot explain why. Perhaps because everything real in my life had always been physical, tangible. Gold you could touch, cars you could drive, palaces you could walk through. The words glowing on my phone felt too fragile, too easy to dismiss as pixels, as data, as something that could vanish with a single swipe. But getting a physical Bible in Saudi Arabia, that was not a matter of walking into a bookstore. It was not something you could order online and have delivered to your villa with the rest of your packages. Possessing one, especially as a prince, especially as a member of the royal family whose very legitimacy rested on defending Islam, was not just illegal. It was unthinkable. It was the kind of transgression that could unravel everything. Not just for me, but for my entire branch of the family. I thought about it for weeks. The idea consumed me. I would lie awake at night, the Quran sitting untouched on my nightstand where it had always been, while my phone glowed under the covers. The Gospel of John open on the screen, reading, rereading. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. The words were so absolute, so uncompromising, so different from everything I had been taught. In Islam, Jesus was a prophet, honored, yes, but just a man, a messenger like the others. To claim he was God, to claim he was the only way, that was shirk, the unforgivable sin. And yet, these words, they rang with an authority I had never encountered. They did not argue, did not defend. They simply declared, with a calm certainty that either made him a lunatic or exactly who he claimed to be. I had to know I had a trip planned to London. I often went there. It was one of my regular escapes. Shopping on Bond Street, dinners in Mayfair, clubs where no one cared about religion as long as your credit card worked. I told my father's assistant I would be gone for a week. Maybe two. He did not question it. Why would he? I was a grown man, and princes did not need permission to travel. The flight was the same as always, private jet, leather seats that reclined into beds, a steward who brought whatever I asked for without making eye contact. I sat by the window, watching Riyadh fall away beneath me, the city light spreading like a circuit board across the dark desert. And I felt, for the first time, like I was leaving not just a place, but a prison I had not known I was in. London was cold, gray, raining when we landed. I loved it. The driver took me to the usual hotel, a 5-star suite overlooking Hyde Park, marble bathrooms, Egyptian cotton sheets, a view that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. I tipped him, sent Ima away, told my security detail I wanted privacy. They posted themselves outside the suite, far enough to give me space, close enough to respond if I needed them. I waited until dark, then I changed, not into my usual designer clothes, but into the simplest things I owned. Jeans, a dark jacket, a cap pulled low. I had never dressed to be invisible before. It felt strange, humbling. I slipped out through a service entrance I had scoped earlier, avoiding my own security, my heart pounding like I was committing a crime, which, in a way, I was. I had found an address online, a Christian bookstore in a quiet part of the city, far from the tourist areas, far from anywhere someone might recognize me. I took the tube, the London Underground, something I had never done in my life, standing among commuters, pressed against strangers, anonymous. It was terrifying and exhilarating. The bookstore was small, tucked between a cafe and a dry cleaner, a simple sign in the window, New Life Books. I stood across the street for 10 minutes, watching, making sure no one I knew was nearby, making sure this was not some kind of trap. Though who would trap me, and for what? I was just a tourist, just a young man buying a book. I pushed the door open. A bell chimed soft. Welcoming, this smell hit me first. Old paper, dust. Something faintly sweet like incense, but not quite. The shop was narrow. Shelves lining both walls, stacked with books of every size, Bibles, commentaries, devotionals. A woman behind the counter looked up, smiled. "Can I help you find something?" Her accent was British. Her eyes kind. She had no idea who I was. No idea that the man standing in her doorway, in his cheap jacket and nervous hands, was worth more than her entire street. I need a Bible," I said. My voice sounded strange, small, of course. She said, standing, moving toward a shelf. "Do you have a preference?" "King James, New International Study Bible." I had no idea what she was talking about. Just a Bible," I stammered. "Something I can read, understand." She pulled one from the shelf, leather-bound, not too large, not too small, black cover, gold lettering. "This is a good one," she said gently. "New International Version, easy to read, with some notes to help with context." She placed it in my hands. The weight of it. I was not prepared for the weight of it. Not physically. It was not that heavy, but the moment my fingers closed around that cover, something shifted inside me. This was real. This was happening. I was holding in my hands the most dangerous object I could possess. More dangerous than a weapon. More dangerous than explosives. Because this book, if discovered, would not just end my life. It would brand me a traitor, an apostate, a disgrace to my family and my faith. "Are you all right?" the woman asked. Concern crossing her face, I realized my hands were shaking. Yes, I'm fine." "How much?" She told me the price. Some absurdly small number. I pulled out cash. Far too much. Pressed it into her hand. "Keep it, please," I said, before she could offer change. I needed to leave. Needed to get out before I lost my nerve. "Wait," she called after me. I froze at the door, terrified she had recognized me, that somehow she knew. "Would you like a bag?" A bag, of course. I could not walk through London carrying a Bible openly, not if I wanted to remain unseen. "Yes, thank you," I whispered. She slipped it into a plain paper bag, folded the top, handed it to me with that same kind smile. "God bless you," she said. I did not know how to respond, so I just nodded and walked out into the rain. The trip back to the hotel was a blur. I clutched the bag against my chest, under my jacket, like it might explode if I let go. Every person who glanced at me felt like a threat. Every camera, a witness, as being irrational, paranoid. No one in London cared what I was carrying, but the fear was so deeply programmed I could not shake it. Back in my suite, I locked the door, checked it twice. 3 times. My security was still outside. I could hear them talking quietly in the hallway. I moved to the bedroom, closed that door too, locked it, drew the curtains. The room fell into a warm, dim silence. Just me and the bag on the bed. I sat down beside it, staring at it for a long time. Once I opened it, once I started reading, there would be no going back. I would truly know what it said, what it claimed, and I would have to decide, believe it or reject it. There was no middle ground with a book like this. My hands were still shaking as I reached for the bag. The paper crinkled. Loud in the quiet, I pulled the Bible out, set it on the white duvet. The leather was smooth, cool under my fingers. I opened the cover. The smell hit me again. That particular scent of paper and ink and time. I had owned rare books before, first editions, manuscripts. But this felt different, sacred, as if the object itself carried weight beyond its material. I turned to the first page, the Gospel according to Matthew. My eyes scanned the opening, genealogies, names I did not recognize. Then the birth of Jesus Christ. I read slowly, carefully, letting each word sink in. The angel appearing to Mary, the virgin birth, the wise men following a star. It was familiar. We acknowledge some of this in Islam, but here, in these pages, it was told differently, with a reverence, a significance that elevated it beyond mere history. Then I reached his words. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. I read them once, twice, 3 times. They were the opposite of everything I had been taught about power, about strength, about what it meant to be blessed. In my world, the blessed were the rich, the powerful, the feared. Here, Jesus was saying the opposite. That blessing came through poverty of spirit, through mourning, through meekness. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. I stopped. The words sat on the page like a challenge. In Islam, there were rules for enemies, for warfare, for how to treat those who opposed you. But this was something else entirely. This was not strategy, not even justice. This was love, irrational, sacrificial, impossible love. I kept reading. Hours passed. The call to prayer from a nearby mosque drifted through the London night, a reminder of the world I came from. I ignored it, my eyes fixed on the pages, on the miracles, the parables, the confrontations with religious leaders who sounded so much like the imams and scholars I had known all my life. Men who loved rules more than people, who built walls instead of bridges. And then the crucifixion. I had known the story. In theory, Muslims believe Jesus was not actually crucified, that God substituted someone else, that Jesus was taken up to heaven without dying. But here, in these pages, it was undeniable, graphic, brutal. The Son of God, nailed to wood, bleeding, dying, not because he was weak, but because he chose it. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Tears blurred my vision. I did not understand why I was crying. I had seen violence before, watched movies, heard stories, but this was different. This was God, and letting that on flesh be torn apart. For people who hated him, for people like me who had spent years mocking his name, then the resurrection. He is not here. He has risen. I closed the Bible. My hands were trembling again, but not from fear this time, from something else, something I had no name for. If this was true, if even a fraction of this was true, then everything I had believed, everything I had built my identity on, was wrong, not just incomplete, wrong. The emptiness I had carried for years, that void I had tried to fill with cars and trips and women and achievements, suddenly had a shape. It was God-shaped, and not the distant, rule-obsessed God of my childhood prayers, but this God who came down, who touched lepers, who ate with sinners, who died and rose again so that people like me could know him. I knelt beside the bed, not facing Mecca, just facing the floor, my forehead pressed against the carpet. And for the first time in my life, I prayed, not in Arabic, not in memorized phrases, but in my own words. broken, desperate, real, Jesus, I whispered. The name felt strange on my tongue. Foreign, forbidden Jesus. If you are real, if you are who this book says you are, then I need you. I have tried everything else. Money, success, religion, and none of it works. None of it fills the emptiness. I do not know how to do this. I do not know what happens next, but I believe, I believe, help me believe. The room was silent, and then it was not. I cannot explain what happened next in a way that will make sense to someone who has not experienced it. There was no voice, no vision, no blinding light, but something, someone filled that room. A presence, warm, overwhelming, undeniable, peace. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of something greater than any problem flooded through me like water breaking through a dam. I wept fully, without shame. My body shaken with sobs I had held back for years. All the emptiness, all the fear, all the performance. It poured out of me, and in its place, something new, something I had never known, settled into my chest. Joy, real, irrational, undeserved joy. I stayed there for hours, kneeling, crying, praying, talking to God like he was in the room with me, because in some way I could not explain, he was when I finally stood. The sky outside was turning gray with dawn. I walked to the window, pulled back the curtain, looked out at London, waking up, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was not the same person who had walked into that bookstore yesterday. I was born again. The phrase had always sounded absurd to me, religious nonsense. But now I understood something in me had died, and something new had begun. And then, as the joy began to settle, as my heart rate slowed, as reality crept back in, another realization hit me. Cold, sharp, inescapable, I was an apostate. Under Saudi law, under Sharia, I had just committed the one unforgivable crime. I had left Islam. I had accepted Jesus as Lord, as God, as Savior. And if anyone found out, if my family discovered this, if the religious police even suspected, I would die, not metaphorically, literally. Apostasy was punishable by death, sometimes by beheading, sometimes by other means. There would be no trial that mattered, no appeal that would succeed. The law was clear, the punishment absolute. I looked at the Bible on the bed, still open to the page where Jesus rose from the dead, and I understood with a clarity that was terrifying and beautiful at the same time that following him would cost me everything. My title, my wealth, my family, my country, possibly my life. And somehow, in that moment, it felt worth it. Because for the first time in 28 years, I was not empty anymore. I could not stay in London forever, as much as every part of me wanted to miss that flight. To disappear into a city where no one knew my name, where the call to prayer did not echo from every corner, reminding me of the life I had just betrayed. But reality, the weight of blood and duty, pulled me back like a chain around my ankle. My father expected me at a meeting in Riyadh. My absence would raise questions I was not ready to answer. Not yet. So I flew home. The Bible was in my carry-on, wrapped in a plain t-shirt inside a bag of other clothes. My hands trembled when I handed it to security at Heathrow, then at the private terminal in Riyadh in theory. As a prince, my luggage was barely checked. Protocols were different for us, but fear has no interest in theory. Every beep of a scanner made my heart lurch. Every glance from an officer felt like an accusation. Somehow it passed. By the time I reached my villa, the sun was setting over the city, washing the sky in orange and purple streaks that looked almost like blood. I walked through the gate, past the guards who saluted, past the fountains that sprayed arcs of water into the air, past the marble columns that had always made me feel important. And all I could think was, I am bringing a bomb into this place. Not one that explodes outward, but one that detonates everything inside my bedroom. I locked the door once, twice, 3 times. My hands checked the handle compulsively, as if testing the strength of the thin metal against the storm I knew would come if anyone discovered what lay hidden here. I closed the curtains even though the high wall around the compound meant no one outside could see in. Paranoia whispered that cameras could be anywhere, that eyes could be watching. I took the Bible out. It felt heavier than it had in London, as if the air in Riyadh was denser, more hostile to its presence. I ran my fingers over the cover, then scanned the room. I needed a place to hide it. Somewhere no maid would casually clean, no family member would casually inspect, somewhere that would not draw attention if someone searched my things. My eyes fell on the bookshelf, a row of expensive encyclopedias my father had gifted me years ago, leather-bound, untouched, purely decorative. No one ever read them. They were there to suggest something about my education, my seriousness, that was more aspirational than accurate. I pulled one volume out at random, felt its weight, flipped through the pages. An idea surfaced. Desperate, half-formed, I found a box cutter in my desk, sat on the floor, and began to carve it. Took hours. My hands cramping, sweat beading on my forehead despite the air conditioning. I hollowed out the center of the pages, layer by layer, leaving a solid frame around the edges. Fine paper shavings clung to my fingers, dusted my pants. I worked slowly, meticulously, the way I had never worked at anything in my privileged life. When it was done, I slid the Bible into the hollow. It fit almost perfectly. I closed the cover. The volume looked exactly as it had before. Same title on the spine, same position on the shelf. But now, inside, it carried the most precious, most dangerous object I owned, my hiding place. Every time I walked past that shelf in the days that followed, my heart beat a little faster. I saw the encyclopedia, saw the one that was no longer just paper and ink, and felt both comfort and terror. Comfort that the word was near. Terror that one wrong move, one careless moment, and a maid dusting the shelves might notice something odd, might lift the book, might feel the difference in weight, might open it. Life became a double existence. Outwardly, nothing had changed. I still rode in convoys, still attended meetings, still sat in the front row at the mosque beside my brothers, my cousins, my father. When the call to prayer echoed, I joined them washed, lined up on the soft carpets, facing Mecca, bowing, prostrating, rising in unison like a well-rehearsed choreography. But inside, everything was different. I would stand shoulder to shoulder with other men, listening to the Imam recite verses I had memorized as a child, my lips moving along, and in my heart, I whispered a different name, Jesus. While my body faced the Kaaba, my soul turned toward the one who had met me in that hotel room, who had filled my emptiness with his presence. Every Allahu Akbar that rolled off my tongue was accompanied by an unspoken, Lord Jesus, I love you, I trust you, forgive me for this pretense. You know why I do it? You see, my fear, I hated the deception at Torre Hachimi. Every time I knelt in the mosque and went through the motions, I felt like I was betraying him, like Peter warming his hands by the fire while Jesus was on trial. But what choice did I have if I publicly refused? If I suddenly stopped attending prayers? Questions would explode, suspicion would bloom, and I knew with a certainty that made me cold at night, that such suspicion in our house could be fatal. So I lived a lie. To protect the truth, it was exhausting. Not just the religious pretense, but the performance of my old life in every area. The parties, the arrogance, the casual cruelty that had once been normal among my peers. I could not do it anymore. Something in me had shifted, permanently. The Jesus I met in the pages of the Bible, the one who touched lepers, who defended the woman caught in adultery, who welcomed children, who washed his disciples' feet, he would not have laughed at the same jokes, treated servants as invisible, boasted about wealth the way I had always done. I found myself apologizing to staff I had barely acknowledged before, saying thank you with genuine gratitude instead of careless habit, learning the names of the men who drove my car, the women who cleaned my room, asking about their families, their home countries. Their surprised faces cut me because it showed just how invisible I had made them for years. I stopped hosting wild gatherings at my villa, stopped bringing friends over for nights of shisha and music and girls and whatever else we could find to distract ourselves. I told them I was tired, that I needed to focus on business, that I was traveling more. Some believed me, some did not. Rumors began to swirl. Are you okay? One cousin asked me in the palace courtyard one afternoon. his tone light, but his eyes sharp. You've become serious these days. No more fun, no more parties. What happened? Did you fall in love or something? I shrugged, forcing a small smile. Maybe I'm just growing up, I said. We can't be boys forever. He snorted, clapped me on the shoulder. Speak for yourself, brother. He laughed. Life is short. Enjoy it before it's taken from you. His words, unintentional as they were, hit deeper than he knew. My brothers noticed too. At a family dinner, one of them leaned back in his chair, watching me as I politely declined a third course, as I answered our father's questions with more thoughtfulness. Less bravado. You're soft these days, he said once, half joking, half accusing. No more temper, no more shouting at staff. Are you becoming weak in our world? Kindness was often mistaken for weakness, humility for lack of confidence. I felt the trap closing. If I remained arrogant, I betrayed the one who had changed my heart. If I showed the change, I risked drawing exactly the attention I feared most. So I tried to strike a balance, outwardly cordial but not too devout, inwardly clinging to Jesus with everything in me. The act drained me. Every day felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of knives. The Bible became my lifeline, la chiachi night. When the palace quieted, when the last footsteps faded down the hall, I would lock my bedroom door, draw the curtains, pull the hollow encyclopedia off the shelf, heart pounding even though no one was there, and gently lift the hidden book from its paper coffin. I would sit on the floor by the bed, back against the wall, legs pulled up, the Bible open on my knees, reading by the soft light of a lamp. Sometimes I read the Gospels, the stories of Jesus that had first captured my heart. Sometimes I turned to the letters, to Paul writing about grace, about being a new creation, about the spirit that cries, Abba, Father, inside us. Every page felt like water in a desert. The more I read, the more the God of my childhood, distant, stern, conditional, faded, replaced by this Jesus who looked at me, at my pride, my sins, my fear, insta said, come. The contrast between the religion I had known and the relationship I was learning about was like night and sunrise. One bound, the other freed. I began to talk to him constantly, whispering under my breath in the car, in hallways, in the garden. Help me. Jesus, give me wisdom. Protect me. Forgive me. It was madness to be a prince of the house of Sod, walking through palaces, secretly praying to the God my family had spent generations opposing. The terror of being discovered never left. Every knock at my door made my stomach drop. Every unexpected visit from a brother, a cousin, an uncle set my pulse racing. I would shove the Bible back into its hiding place. Wipe my face, compose my features into the practiced calm of a prince, and open the door as if nothing was wrong. I became obsessive about the details, checking the lock on my door 3 times before taking the Bible out, listening for footsteps outside, pausing mid-page if I thought I heard something, closing it, sliding it into the hollow, returning the encyclopedia to the shelf, rearranging the other volumes so nothing looked out of place. I told myself I was being careful. In reality, I was slowly unraveling. The human mind cannot live in such constant fear without cracking. I slept little, woke often from nightmares in which the religious police burst into my room, dragging me from bed. The Bible falling to the floor as my father watched, eyes full of disgust. My days were a blur of performance. My nights a battle between hunger for God and terror of men. It was inevitable. I see that now, that I would slip. It happened on a night like any other. The air was hot despite the air conditioning. A sandstorm had passed earlier, leaving the sky hazy and the city coated in a fine layer of dust. The palace was quieter than usual, my father away on business, some of my brothers traveling. The compound felt empty. I retreated to my room early. Claiming a headache, the staff brought me tea. I thanked them, waited until their footsteps faded down the hall, locked the door, checked it once, twice. My body knew the ritual. My heart remained restless. I went to the shelf, pulled out the encyclopedia, my fingers finding the familiar spine by instinct in the dim light. I sat on the floor, pulled the Bible out, opened it to the Gospel of John, chapter 10. I had been reading about the Good Shepherd. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish." The words washed over me, soothing, gentle. I read them aloud in a whisper. Tasting them, no one can snatch them out of my hand. Tears came, unbidden. My chest ached, because those words met me exactly where I was, hiding, terrified that at any moment someone would snatch me from this fragile new faith, from this fragile sense of security in him. And here he was, promising the opposite. I closed my eyes. For once, I did not fight the emotion, did not swallow it down. I let myself weep, quietly at first, then more deeply. My forehead sank to the open pages, my hands clutching the book as if it were a life raft. I whispered, over and over, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. Thank you." I do not know when I fell asleep. Exhaustion finally claimed me there on the floor, head resting near the Bible, the lamp still on, the door unlocked, because in my desperation, in my desire to reach him, I had skipped one step of the ritual, one small movement that had kept me alive this long. I did not check the lock a third time. The click of the door opening woke me. Soft, almost hesitant, but in the silence of that hour it sounded like a gunshot. My eyes flew open, brain sluggish, heart exploding in my chest for a heartbeat. I did not understand where I was, why my neck hurt, why there was a weight on my legs. Then I saw the Bible on my lap, open, exposed, its pages smudged with the damp imprint of my forehead. I looked up. He stood in the doorway. My father. He was not supposed to be there. He was meant to be in another city. Ach Michins. But plans shifted quickly in our world. Flights were changed, schedules rearranged, and no one thought to tell the son who spent most of his days in a villa within the same compound. He stared Hachi-Mi at the scene before him. His son, a prince of the House of Saud, sitting on the floor like a nobody, tears still wet on his face, clutching a book that needed no explanation. The room went silent. Not just quiet, but heavy. Every sound in the world seemed to recede, leaving only my shallow breaths, the faint hum of the air conditioner, the pounding of my heart, and the thrumming tension between us. His eyes, I will never forget the look in his eyes. At first, there was confusion, his brows slightly drawn, as if his brain could not quite process what his eyes were seeing. Then recognition, not of me, but of the object in my hands. It took only a second. The cross embossed on the page, the columns of text, the thin paper. He had seen Bibles before, confiscated, destroyed, warned against from pulpits. And then something behind his gaze, something that had always been warm, even when distant, even when filtered through expectation and tradition, went dark. The love, whatever form of it he had carried for me, receded like a tide pulled back by a black moon in its place. A cold, sharp, deadly hatred began to rise. Not the personal kind, not the anger of a father whose son has disappointed him, but the righteous fury of a man who believes he is staring at treason. His jaw tightened, the muscle in his cheek jumping, his hands, usually so steady, flexed at his sides. His eyes, those eyes that had once looked at me with pride when I recited Quran as a boy, now burned with something else entirely. "Ayudu Billah," he whispered. Under his breath, a phrase we use to ward off evil. "I seek refuge in God." His gaze locked on the Bible again, then on my tear-streaked face, then back for a moment. Neither of us moved. I felt rooted to the floor, my fingers refusing to let go of the book, even as every survival instinct screamed at me to shove it under the bed. To deny? To lie? My mouth opened, but no sound came. There was nothing I could say, no explanation that would make this acceptable. In this house, in this family, in this country. There was no context in which a prince weeping over a Bible was anything but a horror. He took one step into the room. The air temperature seemed to drop, though sweat broke out on my back. His eyes never left mine now, pinning me in place, assessing, judging, sentencing. All the photos on the walls, the trophies, the symbols of my privileged life, faded to meaningless decoration in this moment. There were only three things that mattered: my father, me, and the book between us. "What is that?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm. Each word dropped like a stone into the suffocating silence. I swallowed, my throat dry, my hands tightening involuntarily around the Bible. I knew that whatever came out of my mouth next would change everything. There was no unsaying, no unseeing, no way to put this back in the hidden space between encyclopedia pages. I opened my mouth, and the boy inside me, the one who had spent his entire life trying to earn this man's approval, to avoid his anger, to live up to his name, died in that pause, because in the look in his eyes, I saw not a father wrestling with confusion, but a guardian of the faith confronting a threat. And I understood with a clarity that sliced through every excuse, every rationalization, every hope that maybe, somehow, this could all be handled quietly to him in this moment. I was not his son. I was an apostate. And apostates in our world did not live when his words finally came. They did not come as a shout, but as a whisper sharpened into a blade. "What have you done?" he said. Each word separated, heavy, soaked in disbelief. The man something who had far more dangerous than anger, who had put his hand on my shoulder the day I recited the Quran in front of visiting dignitaries, now looked at me as if I were a stranger who had broken into his house. I opened my mouth, my tongue thick. "Baba," I began, the old childhood name slipping out, instinctive, pleading. The back of his hand hit my face so hard my vision exploded in white. It was not the slap of a father correcting a son. It was the blow of a man striking an object. Something that had offended him simply by existing. My head snapped to the side, the taste of iron flooding my mouth. I felt the skin split on my lip, warmth spreading down my chin. The Bible tumbled from my hands, hit the floor with a dull thud. Pages fluttering, it landed open. The thin paper crinkled. John, his words face up between us like a crime scene. My father stood over it, chest heaving, hands still raised. His eyes were wild now, but not with uncontrolled rage, with a cold, focused fury, the kind that had made ministers tremble when he entered a room, the kind that had once been turned outward at enemies of the state. Dissidents now turned inward, at his own flesh and blood. He hit me again, this time with his fist, straight into my cheekbone. My body toppled sideways, my shoulder slamming into the floor. A sharp pain shot down my arm, my vision doubling. For a moment, I heard nothing but a high-pitched ringing, like the aftermath of an explosion. "You shame me," he hissed, voice low, trembling not from weakness but from the effort to contain himself. "You shame your brothers, your grandfathers, your entire house." His foot lashed out, catching my ribs, a burst of pain blooming there. My breath whooshed from my lungs. I curled instinctively, arms wrapping around my torso. The physical pain was real, sharp, but it floated on the surface of something far deeper, far worse. In that moment, as I lay on the floor at his feet, bleeding, curling around the word that had saved me, I realized something inside me had cracked. Not my devotion to Jesus, but the illusion that my father's love for me was unshakable, unconditional, had believed that under all the layers of tradition and pride, there was a core that simply loved his son. Now, I saw how thin that layer had been, how quickly it could be burned away by the fire of religious outrage. He grabbed my collar, yanked me upright. His fingers dug into my throat, white spots dancing before my eyes as the fabric choked me. He dragged me across the floor, my knees scraping on the rug. My hands scrambled, reaching out, fingertips brushing the cover of the Bible. I caught it, clutched it to my chest with one arm, even as he hauled me toward the door. "Leave it," he snarled, noticing, trying to wrench it away. "No," I gasped, the word tearing out of me, surprising even myself. "Please," he froze, for a fraction of a second, as if the please insulted him more than the object. Then he tore the Bible from my grasp with a vicious twist. My fingers scraped the leather, then closed on air. He held it up between us, as if examining a piece of filth, his lip curling. "You bring this into my house," he said, voice low and shaking. "You kneel to this." In my house, he did not hit me again then. He did something worse. He called for the guards. 2 of them appeared almost instantly, as if they had been outside the entire time, listening, waiting. Their eyes flicked from my bruised face to the book in his hand, then back. I saw something like horror there, quickly masked under a professional blankness. "Take him," my father said. His tone had shifted. Colder, more formal. The voice he used in official meetings to the inner majlis. Now, do not let him speak to anyone. Do not let him out of your sight. Father, I choked, my knees buckling. Please, listen. His gaze sliced through me. You will be silent, he said, until men who know the law decide what to do with you. The guards took my arms, one on each side. Their grips were firm, not brutal, but unyielding. I did not fight. There was no point. They hauled me to my feet, my legs unsteady, blood from my split lip dripping onto the front of my thobe. As they led me out, I glanced back. He stood in the center of my room, alone, the Bible still in his hand. His shoulders were squared, his jaw clenched. He looked down at the book with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not even when watching reports of terrorists or criminals. It was a mix of loathing and fear. The door closed between us. They took me through corridors I had walked 1,000 times, but everything looked different, warped. The paintings on the walls, the plush carpets, the intricate light fixtures, all blurred at the edges. My focus tunneled down to the pain in my ribs, the metallic taste in my mouth, the iron grip on my arms, and the echo of his words still in my heart. No one can snatch them out of my hand. We reached the inner majlis. This was not the public meeting hall where guests were entertained, but a smaller, more private room where serious family matters were discussed, where alliances were made, and sentences handed down away from foreign eyes. They pushed the doors open. Inside, several uncles and older cousins were already seated. News traveled fast in our house. Perhaps my father had called ahead. Perhaps rumors had preceded me. Their faces turned as I entered, their expressions shifting from idle curiosity to shock, to something harder, more closed. My father was there too now. Somehow he had reached the room before us. He stood at the far end, near a low table. The Bible lay there in the center, like evidence in a trial. Sit him, he commanded. The guards forced me down on my knees in the middle of the room. Arms still held. I knelt on the thick carpet, the fibers soft against my skin, my body trembling not from the cold, but from the enormity of what was unfolding. For a few moments, there was only heavy breathing, the hiss of the air, the faint crackle of incense burning in a brass burner at the corner. My uncles stared at me, some with open disgust, some with something like mourning, all with a distance that had not been there before. Then my father spoke. "This," he said, gesturing toward the table, "is what I found in my son's room," in his hands. While he wept over it like a lover, a murmur rippled through the men. One of my uncles leaned forward, squinting at the object. His face went pale, jaw tightening. "Astaghfirullah," he breathed. "May God forgive us. It is his," my father continued, each word measured, like placing stones. "He admits it. He has been reading it, praying to the one named in it. He has turned his back on the faith of his fathers, on the religion of this land." The room chilled at some unseen signal. Two men in white robes and short beards entered from a side door. Their presence changed the atmosphere instantly. These were not family. They were representatives of the religious establishments, scholars, perhaps even members of the religious police. Their eyes were hard, trained to sniff out deviation, their mouths already set in lines of condemnation. They approached the table, looked down at the Bible, eyes narrowing. One of them picked it up between two fingers as if it might contaminate him. He flipped it open, skimmed a page. His lips pressing tighter, he turned to me. "Is this yours?" he asked. His voice was deceptively gentle, but his eyes were cold, clinical. "Did you bring this filth into this house? Did you read it? Believe it." My mouth was dry. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought of lying, of claiming it was a curiosity, a mistake, that I had been doing research. But even as the temptation rose, I felt that same quiet strength I had felt in London, kneeling by the bed, the presence that had filled my emptiness, whispering, almost inaudibly, "Be mine, fully." "Now, yes," I said, my voice barely more than a croak. "It is mine. I believe what it says." The room erupted, voices rose, overlapping apostasy. Someone spat, "Disgrace." Another snarled, One uncle covered his face with his hands, rocking slightly, as if physical illness had overtaken him, but his eyes never left me, dark and unreadable. The scholar who had spoken before raised his hand. Silence slowly returned. The others fell quiet, though the air crackled with tension. "Who did this to you?" he demanded, stepping closer, looming over me. "Who poisoned your mind with this? Who gave you this book? Are there others? Other traitors in this house? Speak." "I found it. Myself," I whispered. Truth and self-preservation tangled together. "I read it alone. No one else." A fist slammed into my face from the side. My head snapping sideways. Stars burst into my vision. One of my older cousins stood there, hands still raised, eyes blazing. "Liar," he shouted. "You think we are fools? You think we do not know how these people work. They recruit. They seduce. Tell us who." I tasted more blood, felt it trickling down my chin, onto my neck. The room swam, but through the haze, a different voice echoed still. "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." I swallowed, forced my head up. "No one recruited me," I said, my voice stronger this time. "I read about him, about Jesus, and I knew he is the truth." The word hung there. Al-Hakanim we use for God alone. To apply it to Jesus was to drive a nail into the coffin of my old life. The scholar's face darkened. "You dare," he hissed. "You dare speak such blasphemy here, in front of your father, in front of your uncles." He turned abruptly to one of the guards near the wall. "Bring the brazier," he ordered. Now, a moment later, a small metal brazier was carried in, charcoal glowing red inside, incense replaced with raw heat. The scholar took the Bible, held it over the coals for a moment, looking at me, then slowly, deliberately lowered it into the flame. The thin paper caught quickly. Orange tongues licked at the edges, curling them inward, darkening them to black. The smell hit me, sharp, bitter, the unmistakable scent of burning paper mixed with leather and ink. It filled my nose, my lungs. It felt like I was breathing in my own betrayal, my own death. I watched, helpless, as the pages that had told me of his love, his sacrifice, his resurrection, blackened and crumbled, ash falling into the coals, the cover twisted, warped, the gold lettering blistering. The sight tore something in me, a pain deeper than any blow. "See," the scholar said, voice raised so everyone could hear. "See how easily their lies burn. See how quickly their corruption turns to ash." He turned to me again, eyes narrow. "But your soul, if you do not repent, will burn in a fire not so easily extinguished." He gestured. An attendant approached carrying a small wooden plaque, a simple cross nailed to it, crudely made, perhaps used in other interrogations, trophies of other crushed conversions. The sight of it, even in its plainness, stirred something inside me. Not reverence for the object, but for the one it represented. The scholar held it out toward me, not to give, but to demand something from me through it. "You have been misled," he said, his tone shifting, coaxing now, poisonous honey. "You are young, you have been confused by foreign ideas, but Allah is merciful. If you repent, if you return, if you spit on this symbol of shirk, and say with your tongue that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, we will intercede. We will ask your father to show mercy, to handle this within the family. Quietly," he leaned closer. "But if you persist, if you insist that this Jesus is more than a prophet, if you cling to this blasphemy, then you leave us no choice. The law is clear. Apostasy is death, even for princes, especially for princes. To cleanse the house," he brought the cross nearer, inches from my face. I could feel the grain of the wood, smelled the faint odor of old hands that had touched it before. His eyes bored into mine, searching for fear, for weakness. My heart raced. Sweat beaded on my forehead. My mind screamed. Think, live, say the words, spit, pretend. You can ask Jesus to forgive you later. He will understand. You can survive this. Help others one day. What use is a dead man to anyone? Another voice, quieter but deeper, spoke beneath the panic. Whoever denies me before men, I'll also deny before my Father in heaven. Terror and love tangled inside me. I saw my life flash before me, not the cars, not the money, but my mother's smile, my little sister's laugh, my father's proud gaze when I was a boy. I saw the future I had once imagined: marriage, children, a position in government, influence, respect, all of it, waiting just one act of denial away. Then I saw him, not with my eyes, but in my memory, standing in that dusty Galilean street, bruised, bleeding, carrying a cross he did not deserve, for people who did not deserve him. For me, this moment, my jaw clenched. I looked at the cross, then at the scuola, then at my father, whose face was now carved from stone, eyes hard, mouth a thin line. My voice came out hoarse, but clear. I will not spit, I whispered. I will not say he is less than he is. I belong to Jesus. The room exploded again. Shouts, curses, chairs scraping. Someone kicked me in the back. I pitched forward, hands hitting the carpet to catch myself. The cross fell from the scholar's hand. Clattering to the floor near my fingers, I stared hatchet at the rough intersection of wood and felt, strangely, a surge of peace amid the chaos. Enough. My father's voice cut through the noise. Instantly, silence fell. He stood, shoulders squared, his presence commanding as it always had been. But now there was no warmth, no flicker of fatherhood, only the cold authority of a prince, a defender of the realm, an enforcer of honor. He looked down at me, the son who had once sat on his lap, now kneeling before him as a criminal. You have chosen, he said, voice flat, no tremor. You have been given a chance to repent, and you refused. He turned his gaze to the scholars, to the uncles, to the cousins, watching. You are all witnesses, he declared. My son, Khalid bin, has rejected Islam, has embraced the worship of another, has committed apostasy. There is only one sentence for such a crime. He faced me again. Death. The word landed on me like a physical weight, pressing the air from my lungs. My ears rang. My vision narrowed. Part of me had known this was coming, had read the laws, had heard the stories whispered about others, ordinary Saudis, who had disappeared for less. But hearing it, pronounced over me by the man whose approval had once been my whole world, tore something final inside. Not in this house, he continued. We will not defile these walls with your blood. The proper authorities will take you. There will be a trial, the appearance of process, and then the law will be carried out swiftly. You will be buried without name, without honor, and we will say you died of an illness or an accident for the sake of the family's dignity. He nodded to the guards. Take off his robe, he said. He is not a prince anymore. He is nothing. Rough hands grabbed at me, ripping at the fabric of my thobe, buttons popping, cloth tearing. The fine white garment that had symbolized my status, my purity in the eyes of society, was stripped away, leaving me in a thin undershirt and trousers. One of the guards yanked even that shirt over my head, leaving my torso bare, bruises already blooming across my ribs, my cheeks swelling. The air in the Majlis felt colder against my skin, more hostile. The eyes on me were different now, no longer looking at a fallen sun, but at a problem to be removed. They dragged me to my feet again. My father turned away as they pulled me from the room, down a different corridor, deeper into the bowels of the palace. The carpets grew thinner, the lighting dimmer. The polished marble gave way to plain tile, the gilded frames to bare walls. The smell changed. Less perfume, more damp, more dust, more human. We reached a heavy steel door at the end of a narrow hallway, a place I had never been, never even known existed under our own compound. One guard unlocked it with a key from his belt, the metal groaning on its hinges. Wave off hot. Stale air hit me, thick with the stench of sweat, urine, and something metallic. They pushed me inside. A small, low-ceilinged room, concrete walls stained with old leaks, a single dim bulb hanging from a wire. flickering slightly. The floor was bare, except for a thin mattress in the corner, stained, a bucket near it. The heat was oppressive, trapped as if the air had not moved in years. They shoved me toward the mattress. I stumbled, caught myself, turned back just in time to see the door swing closed. The last thing I saw was the guard's eyes. A flicker of something like pity there quickly snuffed out as duty hardened his features. Then, metal met metal with a deep, final clang. The lock slid into place. The sound echoed in the small space, bounced off the walls, carved itself into my bones. Darkness swallowed me. Not complete, but deep enough that the corners of the cell dissolved into shadow. The bulb flickered once, twice, then steadied at a weak, yellowish glow that barely reached the floor. I stood there, barefoot, half naked, bruised, the bed of a prince replaced by a stained piece of foam. The silence pressed in, thicker than any oud-scented ire from the Maudleys. My mind reeled, ricocheting between images. My father's eyes, the burning Bible, the cross on the floor, the word death hanging over me like a sword. For a moment, a terrible thought crossed me. Maybe I had lost him here. Maybe the presence I had known in London, in my room, could not reach into this pit. Then, from somewhere deeper than fear, deeper than pain, another memory surfaced. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. I sank slowly to my knees on the hot, rough floor, my body shaking, not from the cell's heat, but from shock. My hands groped for something to hold, found only concrete, rough and unyielding. I bowed my head. Jesus, I whispered into the darkness, voice cracking. They have taken everything, my name, my clothes, my freedom. They will take my life, but they cannot take you from me. My words were swallowed by the walls. But somewhere beyond concrete, beyond anger, beyond death sentences signed in secret rooms, I knew he heard the night before my execution. I learned what it really means to be poor. Not poor in the way preachers talk about from marble pulpits, but stripped, emptied, taken from silk and gold and glass towers, thrown down into a concrete box that smelled like every fear I had ever pushed aside. The cell was small, so small that if I stretched my arms out, I could almost touch both walls. The floor was raw concrete, rough under my feet, still radiating the heat it had absorbed during the day. The air was thick, unmoving, heavy with the sour stench of sweat, urine, old blood, and something else. Something metallic and faintly rotten, the kind of smell that sinks into your skin, into your lungs, into your dreams. There were no silk sheets here, no Egyptian cotton, no down pillows, just a thin, stained mattress in the corner, so compressed by the weight of men before me that it might as well have been another slab of stone. A rusted bucket sat nearby, buzzing with flies, its purpose obvious and degrading. Rats moved in the corners, their claws scratching softly against the walls, bold enough to come close when I was still, scattering only when I shifted. I thought of my old bed king size, too big for one person, smooth as water under my fingers. I thought of the bathroom with its gold-plated fixtures, the shower that rained hot water from the ceiling at the touch of a button, the fresh towels replaced every day by hands I never saw. Now I had a faucet that dripped brownish water into a cracked sink, and a toilet without a seat, streaked with the evidence of men who had clung to it in their final hours. The contrast was obscene in the palace. I had lived like a minor god. In this dungeon, I saw what it truly was. Dust, flesh, fragility wrapped in bones that could be broken with one swing of a sword. They told me in the afternoon, new lawn trio. No drawn-out appeals, just a short, closed hearing where the sentence pronounced in the majlis was ruber-stamped by men in robes who barely looked at me. Apostasy, they said, the word hanging in the air like smoke, punishable by death. The method was not discussed. It did not need to be. Everyone knew beheading, swift, efficient, the sword falling in a public square at dawn, or perhaps, given who I was, in a more discreet courtyard, away from cameras, away from crowds. Tomorrow, the guard had said. not meeting my eyes as he closed the cell door again before the sun is high. Tomorrow, I had lived my entire life planning for decades, thinking in terms of investments, legacies, positions. Suddenly, my future had been collapsed into hours. A handful of heartbeats strung together, moving inexorably toward a courtyard and a blade. As evening fell, the heat in the cell changed quality, no longer oppressive from the sun above, but from the bodies of men in other cells. From the stale air trapped here, the sounds of the prison shifted to shouts, metal clanging, footsteps, then gradually a settling, a muffled quiet broken only by the occasional cough, groan, or distant sob. I sat with my back against the wall, knees drawn up, wrists resting on them, staring at the iron door, at the tiny barred slit near the top where a strip of orange light had slowly faded to gray, then black. My mind swirled. Images flashed one after another. My mother's face when I was a child, my little sister running through the garden. The first time I flew in a private jet and pressed my face to the window in wonder, my father's hand on my shoulder at a graduation ceremony. The look in his eyes when he saw the Bible burned to ash, in a brazier, scattered and swept away. But the words were carved inside me. No flame could reach them. Fear crawled up my spine. Not the vague fear of losing status, reputation, wealth. I had already lost those. This was physical, primal. The animal knowledge that in a few hours steel would meet flesh, that there would be a moment when my neck was exposed and another man's arm would rise, and I shoved the image away. I had seen executions before, from a distance, from behind tinted windows or on screens. I had heard the descriptions, the kneeling, the announcement of crimes, the quick fall of the sword. I had never imagined, not once, that I would be on the other side of that ritual. A sound broke the spiral. Footsteps approaching, slow, measured, stopping outside my door. The metal slot scraped open. A strip of harsh light cut into the cell. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a voice drifted in. "You are stubborn." It was my uncle, the same one who had covered his face when the Bible was presented. His tone was not entirely hard, not entirely soft. It carried fatigue, frustration, something that in another context might have been concern. I moved closer. The chain around my ankle, clinking softly. They had shackled me, as if I could go anywhere, as if there was anywhere left to go. He peered in, our eyes meeting through the narrow opening. His once black beard was streaked with white, his features drawn tight by years of politics and secrets. Tonight, he looked older than I had ever seen him. "They have given the order," he said quietly, glancing down the corridor to make sure no one was listening. "At dawn, it will be over." The words settled in my stomach like stones. He sighed, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped, almost a whisper. "It does not have to be like this. Khalid, you are my brother's son. I held you the day you were born. I watched you grow. I do not want to see your head in the sand tomorrow." Anger flared, then faded. What was the use of anger now? "It is not your choice," I said, my voice rough from hours of silence. "You know that." He shook his head. "There is always a choice," he insisted. "They will listen to me, to your father, if you repent. If you say the words, they will find a way. They will say you were confused, that you were under some influence. You will disappear for a while. Yes, but then you will have your life back, your cars, your villa, your position you can marry, have children, you can serve the kingdom." My throat tightened. "Say the Shahada," he pressed down, urgency creeping in. "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Spit on this madness. On this, Jesus. And all of this ends tonight. You sleep in a real bed again tomorrow." He believed, truly believed, that he was offering mercy, salvation of another kind. He could not see that the cage he held the keys to was still a cage. He could not understand that returning to that life with this knowledge in my heart would be a worse death than any sword could deliver. Temptation surged anyway. The images returned, not of wealth this time, but of simple human things. Sitting in the shade with my nephews, hugging my mother, walking in the garden, breathing air that did not stink of rot and fear, even if it meant living a lie, even if it meant burying his name in my chest, never speaking it again. Could I not do more alive than dead? Then another image cut through his face. Not on a page now, but in my memory, the Jesus I had come to love, hanging on the cross, nails through his wrists, thorns piercing his brow, eyes looking down at the men who mocked and spat and gambled for his clothes, and saying, "Father, forgive them." He had turned his back on no one in that moment. How could I turn my back on him now? "I can't," I whispered, my voice barely carrying through the slot, even if I wanted to. "I can't. He is real. He is with me. How could I deny the one who gave me life? To cling to a life that is already over." My uncle's eyes hardened, the flicker of softness extinguished. "Then you are a fool," he spat quietly, not with the venom of the Modules, but with the bitterness of a man watching someone walk into what he believes is destruction. "You choose a foreign god over your own blood, over your own father." I swallowed, tears burning at the back of my eyes. "I am choosing my true father," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my own words. "The one who loved me before I had a name." He flinched, whether at the words or at the conviction in him. I could not tell. "Sleep then," he snapped, recovering, masking whatever emotion had stirred. "If you can, tomorrow, you will meet the truth of your choices." He slammed the slot shut. The sound like a gunshot in the confined space. His footsteps faded. I was alone again. The hours stretched ahead, thin and brittle. The small bulb cast its sickly light, drawing long shadows in the corners. The chain on my ankle clinked every time I shifted, a constant reminder that I was not free. Not yet. Rats resumed their patrol along the perimeter, bold now that the human voice had gone. I lay down on the mattress for a while, the springs digging into my back, staring up at the cracked ceiling. I tried to imagine sleep, but every time my eyes drifted shut, they snapped open again with a jolt of terror, a flash of steel, a phantom sensation of cold metal against warm skin. Eventually, I stopped trying. I slid off the mattress, knees to the floor, chain rattling, the concrete warm and rough under my shins. I folded my hands, then let them fall open. Palms up, empty. "Jesus," I breathed. The name felt less foreign now, more like the one word anchoring me in a storm, you know? "You see, you heard them. You know what tomorrow is?" My voice trembled. I did not try to hide it. "I am afraid," I confessed. "I do not want to die. I do not want to feel the sword. I do not want to vanish into some unmarked grave, to have my name erased." My story twisted. I am not brave. I am not strong. I am terrified. The admission broke something. Tears spilled over, hot, relentless, dripping onto the concrete, making small dark spots that dried quickly in the oppressive heat. "I will not ask you to stop it," I continued, surprising myself. "You can. I know you can. One word from you, and these walls would crumble. These locks would break. They would fall on their faces and worship you. But if you do not, if tomorrow I must kneel in front of another man's sword, then please give me courage." I swallowed hard. "Do not let me deny you," I whispered. "Do not let me be like Peter, saying, 'I do not know you.' Not one, not twice, not 3 times. Let me die with your name on my lips, in my heart. Let me look at that blade and still know you are with me. You will not leave me in the grave, that to be absent from this body is to be present with you." My sobs quieted as I spoke, not because the fear left, but because another current flowed beneath it, steady, deep. "If this is my cup," I said, echoing words I had read in Gethsemane, "then I will drink it. But please stay with me in every swallow, every breath, every second." Silence settled again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the empty void of my childhood prayers. Not the suffocating quiet of a cell that did not care if I lived or died. It was expectant, charged, like the air just before a storm breaks. The temperature seemed to shift, not cooler, not warmer, but denser, as if the molecules themselves were real. The hairs on my arms stood up, a shiver running from the base of my skull down my spine. The tiny bulb overhead flickered once, twice, then steadied, its weak light suddenly no longer the brightest thing in the room. In the far corner, where the shadows had pooled all night, a glow appeared. At first, I thought it was my eyes, tricks of exhaustion and fear, a hallucination born of a mind pushed to its limits, but the glow grew slowly, steadily, like dawn condensed into a single point. A soft, white light, not harsh like fluorescent, not yellow like the bulb, pure, clean. The air pressure dropped, my ears popped, like on a plane descending. The chain on my ankle rattled on its own as the concrete seemed to tremble, not visibly, but in a way my body could feel. The rats scattered, fleeing into cracks I could not see. Even the flies by the bucket buzzed erratically, then went still. The light expanded, filling the corner, washing up along the walls, swallowing the grime, the stains, not erasing them, but rendering them suddenly unimportant. The smell of the cell, that heavy cocktail of sweat and waste and fear, thinned, replaced by something I cannot name. Not incense, not perfume, something like the scent of clean air after rain on dry ground. I could not move. I could barely breathe. The light took form, not in the way smoke does, shifting and insubstantial, but in a way that suggested solidity. A figure stepped forward out of it, or perhaps the light itself condensed into him. It is hard to say. Time seemed to bend around that moment, stretching and collapsing at the same time. He was not tall or short, not in any way that mattered. He was not Western or Eastern, not tied to any ethnicity I knew. His hair, his skin, his robe, all were caught up in that same living light. Not blinding now, not as in visions of glory I had imagined, but gentle, bearable, yet still utterly other. His eyes. If I speak of nothing else, I must speak of his eyes. They were fire and water at once, burning and soothing, looking at me, through me, seeing every secret, every shame, every fear, and yet not condemning, not turning away in them. I saw the hotel room in London, the nights on my floor with the Bible, the moment in the Majlis when I said, I belong to Jesus. The cell, this prayer, my entire wasted, privileged, broken life. And beyond that, something not more. Not the conditional love of a father who can be turned to hate by a book, but a love that had watched me from the moment I was formed, that had followed me through palaces and parties and empty prayers, waiting patiently for the crack in my armor. I knew him, not from icons or paintings, not from imagination, but from the pages I had read, from the voice I had heard in my heart. There was no doubt, no question. Every cell in me recognized him the way a newborn recognizes the sound of its mother. Jesus, I breathed. The word escaping me like an exhale I had been holding in for 28 years. He smiled. Not broadly, not theatrically, but with a warmth that melted the last pieces of ice I had been clutching around my heart. He took another step toward me, and the light moved with him. Every crack in the wall illuminated, every bit of dirt suddenly irrelevant next to the purity of his presence. I fell forward, instinctively, forehead to the floor, not from fear that he would strike me, but from the sheer weight of who he was and who I was not. His voice came, not from above, not from outside, but from everywhere at once, filling the cell, filling me. You lost an earthly father, he said, and hearing him use the word father made my chest ache. But you have found your heavenly Father. Tears spilled again, hot, cleansing. He hates me now, I whispered, words muffled against the concrete. My own blood. He sentenced me to die. I chose you, and lost everything. A hand touched my shoulder, human, warm, calloused, as if used to work. Not the soft, unused hands of the men I had grown up around. The touch grounded me, pulled me out of my spiral. I dared to lift my head, just enough to look at the hand, then follow it up to his face again. In me, he said, those eyes holding mine, you have lost nothing that truly matters, and gained everything you were made for. I choked on a sob. They will kill me tomorrow, I murmured. The sword. I am afraid, Lord, I am so afraid. He knelt then, bringing himself to my level. His robe brushed the dirty floor, and yet did not stain. The light around him did not dim, but seemed to wrap around us both, as if forming a cocoon in that filthy box. "Do you trust me?" he asked, simply, not accusing, just inviting. I thought of my life before him, the emptiness, the numbness, the endless attempts to fill a void that only grew. I thought of the last weeks, even in fear, how alive I had felt, how real, how known. I thought of this moment, a condemned man in a cell, face to face with the one who had walked out of his own tomb. "Yes," I whispered, voice breaking. "Yes, I trust you." He nodded, a tenderness in his gaze that broke me further. "Then fear not," he said, "for I am the first and the last." I was dead. And behold, I am alive forevermore, and I hold the keys of death and the grave. As he spoke, something clinked dilute. The chain around my ankle, the thick iron shackle that had dug into my skin, lay open. The hinge separated, the metal ring no longer closed, as if some invisible hand had twisted it apart without effort. I had not felt it happen. There had been no pain, no force. It was simply undone. A sound behind me. I turned, slowly, heart pounding. The heavy steel door, the one that had groaned and screamed when opened before, stood slightly ajar. The lock, a thick bolt I had heard slide into place, was rigid. The tiny barred slit no longer glowed with corridor light, but a soft, diffuse radiance that I had realized, with a start, was coming from him, spilling out through the cracks into the hallway. I staggered to my feet, unsteady, still half waiting to wake up in my old bed, to find this was all some cruel, vivid dream. But my bruises ached. My lip throbbed. The rough floor under my feet scratched my skin. This was Heiau. I peered through the gap in the door. The corridor beyond was lined with other doors, identical to mine. The guards who had been posted at the end of the hall, their silhouettes visible earlier under the weak lights, were slumped against the wall, heads bowed, weapons loose in their hands, like children who had fallen asleep their chests rose and fell slowly, deeply. They were not dead, simply gone from this moment. I reached out, fingers trembling, and pushed the door. It swung open without sound. The same door that had screamed on its hinges now moved as if it weighed nothing. No squeal, no resistance. The way lay open, not just through metal and stone, but through something far more impenetrable, the invisible web of control and fear that had held me my whole life. I looked back. He stood in the center of the cell, light still pouring from him, filling the cramped space with a holiness that made it look for a heartbeat, like a chapel instead of a dungeon. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw both command and freedom. "Go," he said softly. "Your life is no longer yours, but mine. I will be with you to the end of this age and beyond." I wanted to fall at his feet again, to refuse, to say where you are. I want to stay, but I understood, in a way words cannot capture. That obedience now meant stepping into the corridor, into a world where my name was death, to carry his instead. I took a breath, stepped over the threshold. The chain clinked behind me where it lay on the floor, useless, and for the first time since I was dragged from my room, I walked without it, into a night more uncertain than anything I had ever faced. Free, not because the kingdom had pardoned me, but because the king above every kingdom had reached into a Saudi dungeon and opened a door no earthly power could close. I walked. At first my legs felt like they didn't belong to me, like they were made of someone else's fear and someone else's bones. The corridor outside the cell stretched ahead, dim lights humming, heavy doors on either side like closed mouths. The two guards at the far end, men whose job it was to make sure I never reached this place, slumped against the wall, heads bowed, rifles loose in their hands. Their chests rose and fell, slow, deep, as if they were children in a deep, unnatural sleep. I moved toward them, each step hesitant, waiting for one of them to jerk awake, to shout, to raise his weapon, but nothing changed. No eyelids fluttered, no fingers tightened. I stopped right in front of them, close enough to see the stubble on their jaws, the sweat shining on their foreheads. They did not see me, could not see me. The light from my cell spilled faintly into the corridor, then dimmed as I walked away. Yet even as the physical glow receded, that presence did not. It wrapped around me like a cloak, like a shield. I could not see him now with my eyes, but every fiber of me knew he was there. Behind me, before me, within me. I climbed the stairs. These were not the grand marble staircases of the palace above, with their ornate railings and polished steps. These were concrete, narrow, utilitarian, built not for display, but for function. My bare feet scraped on the rough surface, the chain that had held my ankle now gone, leaving only a reddened ring of skin as a reminder. At the top, another door. This one was wooden, thick, the kind that usually protested when opened, announcing every creak like a warning. I pressed my palm against it, heart pounding, half expecting resistance, alarms, anything. It opened, silently, beyond it. The corridor of the lower palace, familiar again. The same cream walls and framed calligraphy. The same patterned carpets that had once cushioned my royal steps. But tonight, no servants bustled, no guards patrolled. The lights were on, but the world seemed paused, as if someone had pressed a finger on the fabric of time and held it still. I walked past doors that had always been closed to staff, past the entrance to the Majlis where my sentence had been pronounced. I did not look in, could not bear to see that room again. Not now. Not while I still felt the echo of his hand on my shoulder at a junction. 2 more guards stood, one leaning casually against the wall, the other with hands clasped behind his back. Both stared straight ahead, eyes open, yet blank. Unseeing, I passed so close I could have whispered their names into their ears. They did not flinch, did not even blink. The palace gates waited. Not the main ceremonial ones, with their towering arches and cameras and guards and crisp uniforms, but a side gate used for staff, deliveries, the hidden lifeblood of the compound. I had rarely passed through it. Princes did not use such we left in convoys through grand entrances, so the world could see. Tonight, I aimed for the small door. A single guard sat in the booth beside it, a TV flickering blue light onto his face. His chin rested on his chest, mouth parted, breathing slow, heavy. The screen showed some late-night program. Colors dancing, sound muted. He slept through it, through me, through this impossible breach in his duty. I touched the handle of the gate. Cool metal under my fingers. Solid, real. For a heartbeat, I froze, hearing the voice of my old life whisper, "You cannot do this. You will be seen. There are cameras. There are walls. You are a prisoner. You are marked for death." Another voice, deeper, clearer, rose beneath it. "Whom the sun sets free is free indeed." I pushed. The latch clicked. The door swung outward. The desert night hit me like a baptism. Cool air rushed onto my skin, into my lungs, washing away the stale heat of the dungeon, the perfumed suffocation of the palace halls. Above me, the sky stretched vast and black, scattered with stars that had watched empires rise and fall. The moon hung low, pale, indifferent to human dramas, the scent of sand, of dry earth cooling after a long day under the sun. Filled my nose, I stepped out. One step, then another, the gravel crunching under my bare feet. Each breath felt like my first, clean, sharp, almost painful in its fullness. I tilted my head back, looking up, truly looking up for the first time in years. No marble ceiling, no chandelier, no ornately carved dome. Only sky. I was outside. No convoy, no driver, no security detail and earpieces. Just me, shirt torn, face bruised. Marks on my wrists and ankle where chains had been. I had nothing, no wallet, no documents, no phone, nothing to prove I was who I had been born as. If any patrol saw me now, I would be taken, questioned, erased. But the gates of the palace, my old prison of gold and stone, stood behind me, opened not by bribes or political pressure, but by a carpenter's hand that had once pushed aside the stone of his own tomb. I did not run at first. I walked slowly, feeling the sand under my soles grow softer as I left the paved approach. Every step created distance, not just in meters, but in reality, between the man I had been when I entered that place and the man I was now as I left it. When I reached the outer road, the fear of headlights jolted me into motion. I slipped into the shadows, moving along the edge where the darkness was thickest. Every sound made my heart leap. A distant car, the bark of a dog, the rustle of wind through scrub. Yet under the fear, there was something else, a steady, pulsing certainty that I was not alone. I will not tell you every detail of how I reached the border. Some I must keep for the safety of those who risked their positions, their lives, to help a man who arrived at their door with nothing but bruises and a name on his lips, a driver who should have reported me, but instead looked into my eyes and saw something that made him turn the car in another direction, a border guard whose gaze slid past my face as if a veil covered me, whose questions were perfunctory, whose stamp fell on a document I had no right to possess. At each step, when a door should have been closed, it opened. A stranger offered food when my stomach clenched with hunger. A taxi driver refused payment when I realized I had no money left in my pocket. A woman in an airport line handed me her old jacket when she saw me shiver and close to light for the climate I was fleeing into. Every time I thought, this is it. This is where the miracle ends. It simply continued eventually on a cold, gray morning far from the heat of my homeland. I stepped off a plane in a country that did not require my father's name to grant me entry. A country where churches had crosses on the outside, not just in hidden corners of hotel rooms. Where owning a Bible was not a crime. Where the worst thing that could happen to a man who changed his faith was disapproval. Not death, asylum, protection, interviews with officials who listened, skeptically at first, then with widening eyes as the story spilled out, documents filed, temporary papers granted, a process that felt as foreign to me as the language around me. Yet through it all, one thread remained unbroken. He was with me. Years have passed since that night in the Self Dame. As I speak to you, I am not sitting on a gilded chair in a palace. I am in a small apartment on the third floor of an old building in a European city whose name most of my former friends would struggle to locate on a map. The walls are plain, painted in off-white that peels slightly near the windows. The furniture is simple. A second-hand sofa, a wobbly table I assembled myself with more enthusiasm than skill. A bed just big enough for one in the corner. On a small shelf made from 2 bricks and a board sits a Bible. Not hidden inside an encyclopedia, not wrapped in cloth and smuggled. Just there. Its cover worn from years of use. Pages marked with underlines and notes. It is not an expensive edition. Not leather-bound, but it is the most valuable thing I own. I work not as a prince, not as a director of Summerhill Foundation, but as an employee in a modest warehouse. I load boxers, check inventories, sometimes drive a forklift under fluorescent lights that buzz and flicker. My hands, once soft from a life of being served, have calluses now. My back aches at the end of some shifts. My clothes smell of dust and sweat instead of oud and designer cologne. When I get my paycheck, the numbers are small compared to the ones I once played with, but they are honest. The fruit of my own labor, not oil beneath land I never tilled, not interest on accounts I never earned. I pay rent, buy groceries, sometimes send a little to organizations that help others fleeing what I fled. I do not have staff. I wash my own dishes, clean my own floor, sometimes badly, on Sundays. I walk to a church. I slip into a wooden pew among people who have no idea what my last name once opened for me, We Sing Psalms. Some out of tune, but with hearts that lean toward the one I now know. I hold bread and a small cup of wine in my hands, and every time, without fail, I remember another cup in another garden and the one who drank it so I could drink this. Do I miss it? The jets, the servants, the cars, the palaces, the respect that made men twice my age bow. Do I ever wake up and feel the ghost of silk on my skin, the phantom weight of a watch that costs more than my annual salary now sometimes? I am still human. The old life was comfortable, intoxicating. The memory of power does not vanish overnight. There are moments, passing, fleeting, when I see a photograph online of a royal reception, the chandeliers, the smiles, the glittering attendees, and a part of me whispers, that used to be your world. But then I look down at my hands empty of rings, empty of keys to cars and villas, hands that carry only the faint scars of shackles and the fresh marks of work, hands that can lift in worship without fear that a camera will capture and misconstrue the gesture. And I feel richer than my father ever was, richer than any prince seated tonight under a ceiling painted with gold, because what I have now cannot be confiscated by a decree, cannot be burned in a brazier, cannot be buried in an unmarked grave. I have a father who will never disown me, brothers and sisters scattered across nations, who share no blood with me, yet would risk their own to help me. A peace that does not depend on oil prices or political stability, or the fickle approval of other men. A joy that survives prison cells, death sentences, exile, ayavim. So, no, I do not regret it. Not the bruises, not the cell, not the loss of my name and the kingdom of my birth. If anything, my only regret is that it took me 28 years of living in palaces to realize I was starving, that I wasted so much time bowing to a crown that could never save me. Listen to me now. You may never sit in a majlis, never ride in a convoy, never sign a contract with numbers that make your head spin. You may think my story is far from yours, a foreign tale from a distant land. But emptiness does not respect borders. It seeps into apartments and mansions alike, into huts and skyscrapers, into mosque and church and nightclub and office. You might be chasing success, relationships, pleasure, religious perfection, your own version of a palace. You might think, if I just get there, then I will feel full, then I will be at peace. I reached there and found my soul hollow. It was not until I knelt on a hotel carpet with a forbidden book open in front of me, until I whispered the name of a man my culture had taught me to dismiss, until I lost everything for his sake, that I discovered what wealth really is. Not gold, not oil, not bloodlines written in history books, but a cross on a hill outside Jerusalem, and an empty tomb that still stands empty today. Jesus is worth more than every barrel of oil under our deserts, more than every jewel in our palaces, more than every drop of royal blood ever spilled to protect the throne. He is worth your crown, whatever form it takes. And when you lay it down, trembling, afraid, certain that the loss will kill you, you will find, as I did, that what he gives in return is life, real, eternal, unshakable life. And once you have tasted that, once you have felt his hand on your shoulder in the darkest cell, there is nothing this world can offer, and nothing it can take away. That te compares.